how do you suggest someone, obviously as much as you can because there's probably layers to it, find a way to sit with the emotion?
Watch the movie Inside Out. It's an incredibly simple movie to help people understand what can happen for them. Right? And I think we've overcomplicated mental health. So simplifying it is the best part of my job. I can make things really simple, bring it right back. Do you remember in the movie? And they go, yeah, I remember the train of thought. Go back to the train of thought, and some people's train of thought is like Euston Station. They got that many trains coming through. I just say to them, you don't need to let the thought off the train. Just watch the train, let it come to the station. What thought is on it? Is it going to help you or is it going to hinder you? And you can let it go past. And if it comes back, you can assess it again, and you can decide what track you send it on, like really giving them the mental power and the visualization to change those pathways for themselves, but you're bringing them, one, into their present, and two, making them intentional. If you take that off, it's baggage, man. You've got to carry that around all day.
Yeah.
You're either taking it off and you're doing something with it, or you are letting it go past. You don't have to take it off the train.
Hi, welcome to the very first episode of the I'm Listening Co podcast. The very first guest I have is Vee Vinci, a mental health wellness counsellor and coach. I met Vee online through her content creation, but very big in the space of sort of helping people through mental health challenges and a bit of counselling on the side. So really excited for you guys to listen to this episode. We get a little bit into Vee's story and her journey to sort of becoming a mental health counsellor, and a lot about sort of the therapy and the benefits of therapy. But then ultimately we also sort of tap into a few nuggets of wisdom and practices people can take it home with them. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'm excited for you guys to hear it. I kind of mentioned this on the phone with you before, is kind of getting into how you got into your field, like what inspired you to start. Because the way I kind of found your account was on Instagram, right? And you were posting a lot of all your videos, and then you had like so many sort of like awesome little nuggets of wisdom there that I kind of just like, wow, this is actually, first of all, have I never seen this before? And secondly, was more about what kind of inspired you to really just start creating content like that. I think it's such a new age way of accessing people with mental health, especially kind of in this day and age where everyone's so glued to their phones. You've kind of tapped into that sort of mindset, that focus. Where'd the inspiration come from?
Well, I mean, really, I suppose it did sort of ramp up around COVID, to be honest. That's when it sort of, everything's shut down. And when you're dealing with people's mental health, they were really afraid. I mean, everything was really afraid. It was such an interesting space, though, because it was essentially a bit of a trauma space for a lot of people, right? And so it's called post-traumatic stress for a reason, because you normally get someone after the trauma. But to work with someone whilst they're in trauma is a really, really interesting space. So obviously trauma has its, grading, to be honest. But everyone's reaction and experience during that time was so different that I always have a little saying that says you don't measure pain. So whatever was happening for someone at that point was their experience, and that was it. Yeah. So when you've got clients that are all, you should never have a client that is dependent on you as a therapist. But those early stages are very much about rapport building, and so you need them to have safety with you. And so any of my new clients at that point really freaked out. I mean, they couldn't come in, they were really stressed, it was terrible. And so I just started doing stuff from the bedroom, really. I'll put together what happens in stress, like starting from day one. This is what would happen. This is what would happen next. And we went through a series of, at the time, videos, which then turned into a podcast. That's probably how you found some of it. The social media, I've always had a social media presence with any business, but it was very, very basic, really, really intermittent. In fact, I was doing some of it. It was pretty bad until I found my special team member, And she sort of helped me put it all together in the all that online stuff, and it just went from there, really. Yeah. I love that you found it.
Yeah.
It still surprises me that people find it.
Yeah. I think like when you're looking for, I mean, it's sometimes it's when you're not looking for stuff, you find it. But also when you are looking for it, like it's way more accessible than you think it is initially, right? And I think the major thing that stood out to me was looking for community and looking for people who kind of establish themselves in Perth. I think like what kind of I see a lot happen is like there's these huge groups that are so almost like slightly disconnected because of their size.
Yep.
And I find what I want to sort of kind of draw back to and kind of get closer is like the people and that connection and almost like a one-to-one level. But then I think something like your videos and what you're sort of doing is, I think for the most part, like your sessions and your professional career is one-to-one and sometimes couples. Like I know you do some couples counselling. But I think that kind of level of, it's almost like relationship building and intimacy you have with someone face to face a lot of time gets lost when it's like a message that you're spreading out to a large group of people. Whereas it feels very personalized, your content. I think a lot of the messages are, it's your personality shines a lot in there. And I think that's what makes it so easy to connect with you and sort of like get an idea of the type of person you are and maybe the type of counselor you are, and the coaching and the advice you give comes from knowledge and experience versus I read a book and the book says this.
Exactly.
And then you're kind of just rehashing what you've heard. It was very much about like you talking about your own experience and talking about the more like awareness, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a thing that we see too. And what I get, when I get clients, they will come in. I actually get a lot of clients off Instagram now, which always still surprises me. In fact, I had a client the other day, and I don't know if I mentioned to you, saying when we were hooking this up, saying that I'm getting a lot of different culture clients coming through from Instagram, which is really amazing. And, it's a privilege, in fact, to work with people who are not of my culture as well, because I have to learn a little bit about their culture because it's very different. But I had a guy come in and he was Asian in his culture, and he, I had to understand, and it was a relationship. So I had to understand the dynamics of the relationship within their culture, which is always really different for lots of people. And he quoted something I'd said in one of my podcasts. So he had listened to the podcasts, and I thought, wow, given that when I started these, what is now the podcast, they were videos. So I think some of what you saw was accidental initially because the videos were meant to be seen literally for just my clients. Yeah. So it was, it is my personality. It was that very informal sort of space, even though it's a formal session. But it was a very informal space. And so that's what they're used to with me. They are, and I always sometimes say that I am a very unconventional counsellor in that, because I'm not as formal as other counsellors or therapists. And I do that specifically really because I think that's what's lost in the content, is that it can be really clinical and it doesn't connect to the people. So you've got to make any therapy model or any therapy information you give someone, you've really got to be able to convert it to a way that they can implement it in their life. And I've had quite a lot of people say to me, I hear the content, I go to the sessions and I could never understand it. And so they felt like they were stupid or just couldn't get it. And it was just about converting it in a way to, well, how does your life work? And let me help you adapt the modality to your life rather than you trying to figure out how to adapt it. Let me help you do that. And that then becomes more personalised, two, probably more less formal, so more informal. And I don't know, people like it, and I'm pretty blunt.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things is that I think sometimes counselling's got a bit soft.
Yeah. Okay.
And you really need to, if you're going to help somebody, you got to sometimes get rid of that softness bit, still provide safety, but be able to go, what were you thinking, without being rude, because that's exactly what I need to know. What were you thinking? You need to know what you were thinking so that you can figure out, well, why was I thinking that? So then you have less chance of reacting the behaviour again.
Yeah, and a lot of that probably comes from connecting with them and understanding the situation and personalising it and adapting it to the type of person they are, like you said, versus just having a structured, formalised set approach that everyone gets by the book, by the numbers kind of situation. And when you appeal to people, I think you're very honest and open yourself, people can't connect with you. So then when you do potentially be maybe a bit blunter than maybe other counsellors or therapists are, you're very much in a safe space where they know it's coming from your understanding and kind of curiosity to understand and help versus just being, this is what I think will help. It's just like a bit more intuition almost, right?
It is probably a combination. I do say that I'm an intuitive counsellor in terms of the way that I get a feeling or a picture. Actually, my brain works in pictures. So sometimes I'll get this picture pop up and think, what that is. So I'll say it. So it can be quite intuitive. I think the other thing that I've learned about that is that it's the experience. So I've had, quite a lot of lived experiences within therapy models. So it makes it easier to help someone understand what is happening to them because I've had it. I was actually thinking about this last night going, oh, my God, what's he going to ask me? And I thought to myself, one of the things that really stuck with me was that I'd lived a lot of these experiences and was able to sort of, it's almost like understand where somebody was without giving them, making their experience mine or my experiencing theirs. It was just really being able to understand. I often say there is very little, almost nothing that I will ask a client to do in terms of homework tasks, because I do homework, or ask them to do that I have not done myself. So if it is mindfulness or something, anger therapy or an anger technique, anything, there's very little that I have not done myself in a practiced form, or will practice it before if I think to myself, someone could really do benefit with this therapy or this technique, I will practice it myself first. Because if it doesn't work, it's pointless. It's just words on a piece of paper. It's useless.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned going through, I suppose, your own therapy and sort of having that journey yourself. And was that initially what put you onto the path of being a counsellor and helping other people, going through that experience yourself? Or was it similar at the same time, like running Async, that you're kind of moving into that career trajectory and sort of pursuing that path of life, but also during your own therapy and going through it yourself? Or is it more of like an ongoing journey on both accounts?
It's interesting. So the therapy came after probably a trauma. So I'd never been exposed to therapy in my childhood. In fact, I often say to my parents, my dad will often say to me, what do you do again? I go, because I'm really good at communication, and that was one of the things that I help people. If couples come into me, they often come in with, we can't communicate, and I go, oh God, okay, it's just a buzzword, but I can help people learn their communication styles, and I'm quite good at it. And it was not something that was present in my family, and I often do say, my dad will say to me, so how did you learn that? And I go, well, I just grew up in a family that was totally emotionally inept, so I had to learn somewhere, but never learned it at home. But I had a brother, I'm one of four, but my brother died in a car accident when I turned 19 the week he died. And that was my first exposure to probably extreme trauma and the way it played out in my family. And so, Italian, they just didn't do emotions very well. And what they did do was extreme emotion. And I didn't know what to do with that, and ended up, weirdly, at Fremantle Hospital back in the day, because this is like 30 years ago now. And that's where he was taken for emergency. And when I rocked, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I think I had pajamas on. And so I would have been 19. And the nurse, this is the old days when they knew who you were, she recognised me from when my brother had passed away and took me up to their psych or their emergency psych. And I wouldn't even tell you, I wouldn't even know what he looked like or what his name was, but he helped me feel like I wasn't going crazy. And I thought, oh, wow. And that was my first exposure to something like that. So I became fascinated with it, but didn't really know how to access anything like that. And I ended up, getting married and doing the whole marriage thing for a while and got divorced and ended up in therapy then. And that's probably where my journey into understanding therapy started, but I didn't do regular therapy. I did a 4-day emotional, well, I don't know what you'd call it, maybe an anger management course back then, and 4-day live-in. It was full on.
Oh, wow, okay.
Really extreme, intense. Facilitated them later after I did my training and loved it, loved that intensity of that therapy. So when I do one-on-ones, I felt quite, I actually felt more exposed with one-on-one because I started with group therapy.
Yeah, makes sense.
And group therapy was, you share it out. But when it was one-on-one, I was like, oh, my God, what do they want from me? They want so much from me. But, yeah, so that's how I started and then went through. So the therapy came, though. My training didn't come until I was diagnosed with brain tumour 12 years ago. Very lucky. I feel like the luckiest person alive because it was benign, but I had to have huge surgery. So I had full craniotomy 12 years ago, and I'd started my studies probably 5 years earlier and just let it slide, didn't do it. And then when I got diagnosed and thought, man, I'm going to have to do something with my life, man. And so before I went into hospital, I organised for all my study to be restarted, and it was sent to me, basically arrived after I came out of surgery, and I took 6 months of recovery, and took me 18 months to do my studies in the end, and that's where it started.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Some journey.
That was a big journey, yeah. I felt like they'd found my brain and I had to use it.
Yeah, and so 12 years ago, sorry, was it?
12 years ago.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And I suppose how have the more recent 12 years been for you since you've started obviously pursuing that field and
field.
Yeah, and sort of digging deep into that. Like, how do you feel like that's impacted your life and changed the way you feel?
I felt, really the purpose behind doing therapy at that, what really finishing it was, it's easy to say, yes, I want to help people. And I do, but really the primary motivation behind it was to pay it forward. For me, I felt like I'd been given an absolute second chance at life, a real gift, because there are a lot of people that have the same tumour that I have, even though mine was not cancerous. They have the same tumour, but it's infiltrated their brain and everything changes. Some people don't survive it. So for me to have found it, most likely accidentally at the time, but still requiring the major surgery, I was incredibly lucky. So for me, it was about, man, I have to pay that forward. So helping people is a result of that, but it's more than that. It's more about paying forward the gift of somebody else being able to have their life the way they want their life, right? And the way they see it, whatever they're stuck with right now. Yeah. It's not about me helping you. It's about helping you get the life that you want. Yeah. Because that's what I got.
It's like helping people and metaphorically cut out their own brain tumours in a way.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. That's exactly right. So I always like that because I think if you go too much into I have to help people, it can be really martyrish. And then it actually is more about you than it is about them. So I realised now, when I first started, as you work through a field like this, you I think every client gives me some sort of therapy, right? Because I learn something from every client that comes in. So you've got this constant evolution of yourself and understanding of what you're doing. Although I do have my own therapy, I do say to my clients, if you've ever watched any of the videos or the podcast, I do say to my clients, if you've got a therapist, I know people say to me, how do I assess if I've got a good therapist? I said, ask them if they're in therapy. And if they say no, run, because you should always be in therapy yourself to be able to, one, be a conduit, like what you're absorbing from somebody, you need to get rid of it, because if you hold it, it's going to be a problem for you. And being able to understand anything that somebody else brings in is a potential trigger for whatever's happened in your life. Yeah. So you've got to be able to get rid of it all the time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of brings up a question I did want to sort of ask you about. I think it's really hard, and we sort of spoke on this when we were on the phone sort of earlier in the week. I think finding the right therapist or the right counsellor for yourself is really in itself a challenge. It's really hard to find the person that's a fit for you. Not everyone is quite active on social media and putting their personality and have their own podcast into space. I mean, is there advice how would you sort of suggest someone who is looking to sort of see a therapist or a counsellor, how would they kind of pursue finding the right fit in your personal opinion?
It's not a simple answer, to be fair, because the current system is very flawed. And so you probably won't see a lot of psychologists, or especially psychologists, are active on social media because they're not allowed to be. So they've probably got much more stringent guidelines in what they can do on social media. Counsellors do as well, but I don't know. I like to break the rules a little bit like that, because otherwise people can't find you.
That's how you reach people, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. However, in saying that too, you've really got to assess the two models of what you're looking for, because the system currently has been very much aligned with financial rebates. So for me, I've often said, be very clear about what your motivation is. It's a bit like I just said. My motivation was, yes, to help people, but it's the byproduct of wanting to pay forward the gift of life for your life, right? So the motivation is quite clear. If you're looking for a therapist, you've got to be clear about, what do I want out of that? Because if you're going on budget, then you're not looking at your mental health, you're looking at your financial. So, and that's okay, because it works. Right now, there are lots of people in financial difficulty, so you have to work with what's in your financial budget and then try and find the best within that. That's a little bit trickier to find, because you will be able to find really good psych care, but you're not necessarily able to access it right now because of the way the model is. So most people can't get into a psych for 6 to 12 months. I mean, I've got very good referrals in place for, because counsellors should not be dealing with mental health disorders. Counsellors are not trained to do that. My area has always been mental health wellbeing, and being very clear on being able to assess where that balance is, and then having good referral systems set up to refer to somebody who is more qualified to deal with mental health disorders. And I've always had really good referrals in place, but in the last 12 months, it's almost impossible for me to even access those good referrals for people, because they've got wait lists of 12 months. And so it's really tricky. So then you're looking outside, you're now not being able to access something in your financial space. So you've got to look onto the other side, because counsellors aren't covered under any medical rebates.
Gotcha.
In the system, which is probably part of the problem. Yeah. But anyway, I can't get myself into too much trouble here. So then you're looking at, okay, how do I access? So then you've got to go, well, what am I prepared to pay for?
Yeah.
Right? And really that's when you start looking at, then you're sort of getting out of that medical model a bit, and you can go into something like counselling, even coaching to a degree. I'm very mindful with coaching. Yeah. They learn heaps of amazing tools and techniques, but not necessarily the modalities. And same with counsellors, we get the modalities, but not necessarily the tools and techniques that coaches get. So it's a really good blend together if you can get one together. But yeah, it starts to then impact financially. But like anything, isn't it? You've got to decide, what do I want? And to pay for that, I often look at the gap between psychologists and counsellors. Sometimes what you pay in that gap for a psychologist, you're paying me anyway. And the model that I use on normally a 6 to 8 session model is sometimes more, direct and intense, that you get your result quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not dragging it out,
Not dragging it out. Well, yeah, I always
to the
say
chase.
I don't sit in the bullshit area. I go straight for the gut, figure out what is the bottom line gut issue, and really take it out.
Which can sometimes be uncomfortable, I think, right? But that's part of it. You almost have to knock down the Jenga tower to rebuild it, right? Like you have to get to the base of it and get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. I find a lot of people, and we sort of talked to this a little bit. I do like the listening table where I sort of go out in the public and just listen to people talk. And something I hear quite a lot is that people just don't have anyone to talk to. People don't have maybe the practice or the idea to where to source the information, the right places to go. And it's almost like they're a bit lost. And I think that sometimes I find that something as small as being able to talk to someone, something as small as just having a group you're a part of, a community you belong to, where you can just share your thoughts and feelings. It's like if you don't have access to the therapy, you don't have access to the counselling, and maybe financially you don't have that in your budget. There's like sometimes like smaller intermediate means where you can kind of not get your fix and not get therapy and get help, but I think you can not carry as much with you. It's like a dilution of the pain of the problem until you can obviously get the proper help you sort of need, right? How do you feel towards sort of that as like an intermediate means of not therapy, but talk? I think it's talk therapy and connection.
Yeah,
yes,
for me it's about connection. I absolutely love them. I think you've got to find the right one, and this is it gets tricky because if you can find a group, a connective community group that offers simply that, you've got a really great space. There are a few that are around now. If you've got community groups that are connecting you with the motivation to sell something else, then you've not got a great space.
Yeah.
All right. And trying to assess that is tricky. But yeah, there is some local ones. Well, I mean, local for me, local for you. But I'm Fremantle way. There's a couple of groups in their community-run groups at the moment that are quite good. I don't know the name of them, but I've seen a few things come out in our local area where they're connecting, and they've got not necessarily because you can't be running therapy in a group like that because you've got to be careful. I've had more. So I'm trauma trained, and I've had more people come to me in the last 12 months, because I've been a counsellor this will be my 10th, so what is it, 12 years for my tumour, so 10 years for therapy, right, because I did it just after that. Yep. So I've had more people come to me in the last 12 months who have had what I would call a trauma trigger response from an online course than ever before. And what that tells me is that the courses themselves are really effective. What's not effective is the ability to manage the trauma trigger. So these video courses, they're great, but if you don't have somebody capable to manage or monitor the people within that, then you have massive trauma response, which is almost re-traumatizing. So I've had a lot of people reach out or been referred to me saying, oh, I did this course and this is what happened. So for me, I look at that and go, well, the content's really good, but the aftercare is just absent. And it's like leaving someone with a wound. So they've come in to be, and I almost have to help them heal themselves from that trauma wound to be able to do that. So it's really tricky in a group space if you don't have someone there who is able to manage it. So therapy it's probably why it's so hard, because you can get people that will go in and, I mean, I always say to new counsellors, because I supervise new counsellors at times, and I always say to them, don't worry about clients, but they always worry about, where am I going to get a client from? I go, don't worry about clients. Clients will come. Vulnerable people will find you. It's what you do, it's your integrity around that vulnerable person that is the key to your longevity or success as a counsellor. Because if you don't hold that integrity, you can't fix anything, but you can't help them fix themselves if you don't do that.
I suppose that's where the danger lies in sort of something that's kind of like large-scale group therapy, is that not everyone's on the same wavelength and dealing with the same traumas and problems. It can kind of be walking a tightrope with that sort of thing. And
when we first started the video podcast thing, the content weeks weren't top level, but they weren't right bottom level either in terms of gut space, but they flowed. So it helped people really become aware of what they were thinking or what they were feeling, and then gave them small homework tasks to do, because really the biggest thing that people need to do is make a change somewhere. One simple action different to what you normally do, and an awareness of that, making it intentional, can make such a difference to somebody who when they can't work with someone. Does that make sense? So you've got, because you can make one change and it can shift, the ripple effect will shift everything. And as soon as you can feel competent in making one small shift, you will feel more capable, and a lot of things can change in that, because you can't do miracles online unless you are working on a one-to-one basis. I found the online space remarkable. I think the online space to work with people one-on-one is incredible. That's right. But the video thing and the community that we have in HQ, which is my business, is around that content to help you help yourself in a small way first. That's all you have to do. Do those small things. Start looking at and really challenging your thinking and being aware in little things. You'll make some shifts, and if you make a shift, you'll probably make a decision to go, well, I want to do more, and you can make your therapy any way you want.
It's actually a really beautiful point you make around sort of having one small change that rolls into others. I think when you have, and I think I want to sort of tie it back somewhat to your brain tumor in the way of something like life-changing, something quite drastic that really kind of shakes you to your core. Like a lot of people kind of, you build a bit of a safe space around your life and what you think makes you happy and all the sort of habits. And it's not until something sometimes huge and drastic that forces you onto a new trajectory in the way you think, and it changes so significantly the way you deal with your day-to-day life that changing small things seems so trivial in comparison, right? I think
absolutely.
It's not everyone has to get to that point. I think you can establish small change over time and do it in probably a lot healthier way without having to have a major incident in your life. But it's
yeah, I think we don't do enough of the small changes, like really just the little things, because it's why trauma or an incident will bring you back to the small changes, is because you've got to restock, and you've got to basically be present. So the tumour changed an enormous amount of things in my life, more career-wise, I think, and, presence-wise. But, so what was it? I was practising for probably 4 years and with an organisation, and then went out on my own. So my business has been, I've been a sole practitioner for 5 years now, probably coming into 6, and it was the scariest thing I ever did, right? And so moving the first year, I started with one client. That was it. I started with one client, because you don't take any clients from an organisation. So I started with one. I think I rented a room for half a day and that was all I did. And that was great. But within that first, I had a very clear plan of what I wanted, and I was never worried about the clients because I knew that they would come. So I just had to have a plan around, well, what client do I want to work with? And the first year, so I worked on a 12-month, and the first 12 months I was literally coming in. So what it was, March, April, probably would have been April, would have been the year, and I had sort of exceeded my business plan at the time. It was the first time I had 4 days of solid clients. And my son was diagnosed with leukemia.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
He's fine now.
Okay.
He's amazing. But it was a moment in time that was probably worse for me probably as a mother than my tumour. Because when you're dealing with it for yourself, probably those around me struggled to watch me maybe go through what I went through, but to watch your child have to go through that, I was like, oh my God. So that I had to cancel every client, cancelled them, and I thought, what am I going to do? And they sit you in a room and say, basically me and my husband, and said, one of you has to give up your life. Basically, and I thought, well, shit, no shit, Sherlock, guess who that's going to be? And because he was, he's the breadwinner really at the time. He was our main source of income. I was like, oh my God. And I just did not want to give up my business. I thought I fought too hard for it.
Yeah.
So the small change that you're talking about goes both ways.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like even on the other side. But so they said that, and I thought, I will not give up my life. Will not give it up. So, but I had to change everything. So the one change was, okay, I can only do 1 day a week. So I went from 4 days a week to 1 day a week. And every single one of my clients were incredibly beautiful. And, I think they all just stayed with me because he had a 3.5 year treatment. So for the first year, I worked 1 day a week. And in the second year, we managed I think I did 1.5 days for the second year. And ultimately, by the time we got to probably the end of that second year, I was on a 5-day fortnight. That was all that we could do. And it was a juggle, and clients would juggle and fit and do all this stuff. They were incredible. And then the business built back up. Yeah, they were incredibly loyal. But the small shifts, how can I make this work? How can I make this work? And I don't think we spend enough time on those tiny little incremental shifts of how can I make this work? What we keep asking is, why is this happening? And we've got to flip and go, but how can I make this work? And that will give you one small shift that will start your ripple effect to do and feel something different.
In a world where it's very easy to run away from that stuff, I think mentally escape. There's obviously numerous amounts of vices out there: drugs, alcohol, nicotine, social media, movies, TV shows, gaming, porn. There's so many things that you can kind of use to switch your brain off when you're not comfortable. How do you suggest someone, obviously as much as you can, because there's probably layers to it, find a way to sit with the emotion and process it and give it the actual attention it needs to then understand how to act with that emotion? What are some practices or ways that you personally have done that, or you can recommend that I think is quite simple, like baby steps into that mindset? Okay,
so there is 2 little parts to that, because the first thing I notice for people is that they can't identify the emotion. A lot of my husband's in the education department. I won't tell you. I won't dump him into. But he's and he'll often say to me, "So, what'd you do today?" I go, "Another day. I didn't use fucking algebra." Right? Because nobody knows how to identify their emotions anymore, and that's a key component. So we've become really used to describing emotions. So people will come into me and go, "So what's going on? I feel like shit." Go, "Oh, well, that's not a feeling," but it describes a feeling.
Yeah.
And I can't give it to you because it's my feeling then. Yeah. I've got to the shit feeling for me is probably different to what it is for you. So the first thing is really being able to go back to what is the emotion I'm feeling and take it right back to core. The one, if any of my clients are going to be listening to this at some point, they're all going to giggle because I give them pretty much all the same homework in first session. Watch the movie Inside Out.
Yeah.
Right, that's my task. Yep, let's figure out. Then come back to me and then write down what your feelings are, what your thoughts are attached to each one. So it's helping them identify and simplify their overwhelm, right? Because if you can't do that, you can't manage something, right? Because they are all managed quite differently. So then once you've been able to do that, you've got to go, right, okay, a lot of the time it'll be anger is a very big core emotion that is unaddressed in our society. We don't teach anger very well to both male or female. So it's probably the one thing that I see come in a lot. Everyone will come in with their tears, but often I always say to people, sometimes there are tears of frustration, not just tears of sadness. And tears of frustration are an emotion that is not being recognised and therefore will continue to become bigger. So anger can often be a big core emotion that people can't deal with. So exercise in some ways, breathing, I mean, taking things back to breath is really, really important. And I often get a lot of people that'll roll their eyes if you say breathing and mindfulness. But, you know, again, it's about adapting the modality to you. If your breathing is as simple as sitting in your car for 30 seconds and breathing in those 5 core breaths in, 5 core breaths out, that's it. That's all you have to do. As long as it is intentional and it helps you and not hinders you, you can do whatever you want. I can't do mindfulness in, if you're a purist for mindfulness, they would throw me out because I really struggle with that mindfulness in terms of quiet. My brain just isn't quiet. It's not quiet. But how have I adapted it? Guided meditations are incredibly powerful for people who have very, very noisy inner chatter, because an external voice will always drown out an internal voice. They don't operate from the same type side of your brain. So the external voice will always win. Make that external voice helpful, not hindering. When I first did my very early therapy days, as in personal therapy, was talk to myself. So if you can identify the emotion and talk that emotion out, even if it's like what you wanted to say, if you're angry and you think, I just want to tell you how much I hate you, say it. Say it out loud, but just say it in your car or to yourself, because it does that same thing. It swaps from your emotional brain to your reasonable brain, and so it starts to process it. I mean, the basic premise of CBT is thought, feeling, action. If you can harness that, and so rather than think these things, because you're thinking it, and as soon as you think something, you're going to have a feeling. So you'll sit there and think it and feel it and think it and feel it and not say anything. If you just follow the concept and go, well, it's got to have an action, and if I can speak, that's an action, and it starts to process it. So you can do that with any emotion. It's harder with sadness, but often sadness is one of the easiest because you start to cry. So anything that comes out of the body is a form of expression. So you can cry. So many people will stop themselves from crying, particularly men. That's probably the biggest issue, and the component there is the suppression of the action side. But I often laugh because people, happy people don't come and see me, and people who come to see me have either done something shit or they feel really shit. And I've got to take it back to, well, what's the thought? And so pull out what they are trying to avoid to do that. But that's one of the best things that I do. people will laugh when I say I don't have a problem with anger, right? I'm an angry ant. I don't have a problem with anger because I understand it. I love it. I harness it. I don't have any problem with anger. But I'm blunt, and so they'll go, oh, she's really angry. And I think, man, you haven't said nothing. But my problem is fear. So if I will often have huge anxiety or self-doubt. I've learnt to master that now too. Not always, but self-doubt is a massive driver for me. So it can be a real benefit in my life. It pushes me. Yep. But if you tip over, you've got to follow the spiral down. So I know that. But fear is constant and I don't like it. So I have to often talk it out. And when you talk it out, if I talk it out to my husband, he just looks at me like I'm crazy because it sounds crazy in my head. That's why I have to talk it out. Often I'll do it on my own in my car and it feels uncomfortable. Like it feels like it's happening. So the only way to sit with discomfort is to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's what I often say to people, you're paying for me to make you feel uncomfortable a little bit for a while.
Yeah.
But doing that, if I provide the emotional safety for you to feel comfortable when you're uncomfortable, great, got your money's worth because you will learn how to do that elsewhere.
Yeah. And the more you're uncomfortable and sit with discomfort, you become more comfortable being uncomfortable. It's like a snowball effect. It's things that you would maybe not enjoy doing necessarily. You realize that once you've done them once or twice or three times that they don't have the same ability to hurt you anymore. And I think the talking is a massive thing. I'm a massive talker myself. I love talking to my friends about everything and every thought I have. And I talk to myself all the time. And I think it's so powerful that the thoughts almost have more power in your head because they're not specific, they're broad. There's these huge strokes that come and go at like all times, and when you have to articulate those and concise them down to a sentence or a couple of words, they become more powerful in those words, but all at the same time because you're releasing them, it's like I think this the responsibility thing again. It's like this burden off you because it's gone from this mythical huge thing that's in your head to this small sort of, like you said, your husband kind of like laughs and goes, that's a bit crazy because sometimes you need someone else to sort of hear it to kind of realize like, oh, maybe it's not as big as I was thinking it was. I just need to sort of talk it out and kind of get off my chest sometimes, right?
Yeah, it feels huge. Fear can feel huge inside, and then if you can speak something out, it feels really small, like you're holding it. Yeah. For the non-speakers out there, you can write.
Yeah.
Right, does the same thing. Some people will write, and it doesn't have to be like handwritten. We're not in the 20s. Anything, like typing notes, putting it in notes, anything. I've got a document, I've got a locked document in my Word, Microsoft Word. I call it my first drafts.
Oh, yeah.
Right? All the things I wish I wanted to say. Sometimes they go into 2 or 3 because I'm so blunt. The written word for me is even blunter at times. So so my anger, I'll write out the first draft of what I actually want to tell you, and then I'll just keep going until I'm happy with what I could actually send you, right? But it's really effective. But I'm more of a speaker, so I will speak out in cars or wherever, in my house, But if you're not a speaker, then write. Do something with it. It's just got to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Right?
It's almost like, and I've heard this quite a lot coming up, like I think talking is the type of it, but like creativity and creating something, actually making something, you whenever you're putting like painting or you're drawing something or you're talking or you're writing something down, you're channeling your emotions and your feelings into what you're creating. And I think that creative flow is a form of expressionism, and a lot of expression, what you express is what you're thinking about, what you're feeling. And I think that's why I think there's so much therapy in creating stuff. And I think there's sometimes so you can get so much emotion from a conversation or so much emotion from a painting or a song that someone makes.
Absolutely.
It's expressionism in the way of kind of healing, because you're putting what you're kind of going through out there and getting it out of your mind and putting it into how you know to kind of like visualize or process it. And I think, it's so beautiful, I think, to think about like just doing that. But you also got to know what your ability is to do that, right? Like not everyone's a talker, not everyone's a writer.
That's right.
What's your form of expressionism? And I think people get stuck because sometimes they're not the most expressive people in their day-to-day. So they don't know how to channel that. And that's when you can kind of get stuck and kind of go inwards instead of like getting it off you, right?
Yep, that's right. And that's when you might need to come in and see. But if you're looking for something just for yourself to help out to start with, I think there's the two concepts with it is one, make it intentional. So, and the other one is you're present. So when you start to express something, you're present where you are. If you're talking in your car, you're listening to yourself. You've become more present. You've stopped thinking in what might happen and you've stopped wishing something hadn't happened. So you're just more present. When you're present and doing that, then you're intentional. So people who can get stuck in their head with thoughts, like big thought loops, if you might go out and watch the movie now, Inside Out. But it's an incredibly simple movie to help people understand what can happen for them. Yeah. Right? And I think we've overcomplicated mental health. So simplifying it is the best part of my job. I can make things really simple, bring it right back. So for people who get stuck with thought loops, there's a part of the movie that has the train of thought. And I always encourage people to watch the movie because it provides them with a bit of a language that we're both sort of all of a sudden speaking the same language. And I go, so do you remember in the movie? And they go, yeah. And I remember the train of thought. They go, yeah. So it provides a picture because our brain does work in pictures. Yep. The conscious brain works with words. The subconscious brain works with pictures. So you've got to give them a bit of a language that they can understand. So if I say, you've got your train of thought, go back to the train of thought, and some people's train of thought is like Euston Station. They got that many trains coming through. Yeah. Just say to them, you don't need to let the thought off the train. Just watch the train, let it come to the station. What thought is on it? Is it going to help you or is it going to hinder you? And you can let it go past. And if it comes back, you can assess it again and you can decide what track you send it on, like really giving them the mental power and the visualization to change those pathways for themselves, but you're bringing them, one, into their present, and two, making them intentional. If you take that off, it's baggage, man. You've got to carry that around all day.
Yeah.
You're either taking it off and you're doing something with it, or you are letting it go past. You don't have to take it off the train. And that has been incredibly helpful for people in thought loops to do that. That's not therapy. That's just helping someone manage discomfort whilst you work in therapy, because you've got to address, I'd be looking at what's the thought? Where's it come from? Why would you be thinking that? That's the therapy component. But to sit with that is the discomfort part. Yeah. So little tiny techniques like that are really, really helpful and simple.
Yeah.
We've overcomplicated it. It drives me nuts.
Why do you think we've overcomplicated it? Like what makes you kind of say that? Because you're in professional experience, I suppose. You've seen a lot of it.
I often say it's the one space where we've taken a round wheel and made it really clunky. And I think part of that is sales. Right, everyone's selling therapy nowadays, yeah. Right? So when you're selling something like that, you've got to people want to make it new. So they've changed all the names of things, that the same concepts. Then I still use original concepts, like some of Maslow's stuff, even some of Freud's stuff. Yes, he went down a rabbit hole for a while, but he was the father of psych. We still use his concept of ego for shadow, that work. It's really powerful. It was what it was. You don't have to, go down the rabbit hole that he went, but everything has been changed. All the names have been changed. It's confusing. It's confusing for people. And so some of that is, I don't know, I just think we made something really clunky.
Overcomplicated, right?
Yeah.
And then it seems almost inaccessible because of how complicated it is.
Yeah.
Or
people don't understand it. Yeah, they don't understand it. And then so if you simplify it down, and if someone doesn't understand a modality or a therapy in the way that it's being presented, that's on the therapist. That's not on them. They don't know. Yeah. You got to make it. It's on the onus of the communicator to help you understand. And if that person doesn't understand, that's on you, not them. And so you've got to adapt it. And there are lots of therapists that don't. They don't simplify it down to its base, but then again, you've got to give an example of how you can apply it how they can apply it in their life. Otherwise, it's just another set of words that they can't figure out how to apply. So I'll say, like, where would you put that? Where would you do that? How would you do that? And if they can't answer me, I've got to go, oh, right, they obviously either I haven't explained it properly or they can't convert the concept into an action. And if you can't do that, you don't get change, because with the model of change has, quite clear components in it, and it's not until the third component that action takes place. You've got to know you need change. You've got to think about, well, what changes would I make? You've got to test some of them. Then you've actually got the action phase, and that action phase is meant to be consistent action that benefits you, not action that takes you straight back into a relapse point. So if you haven't got the understanding of how to apply what you're being taught into your world, it's not going to work. Yeah, so I think that's the most important part of therapy, figuring out what their world is and what they want, and then how to help them apply it in their world in a way that makes sense to them. Because otherwise, what works in my world won't work in someone else's world.
It's quite beautiful. I'm just realizing we've gone over a little bit, but that's I think we've got plenty of time extra. Yeah. I want to sort of finish. I have this idea of sort of finishing with kind of like two questions. One being, if you had an extra hour in every day of your life doing what you loved, what would it look like?
Well, I don't think it would be seeing more clients. No, because I've got a balance on that. If I was to do that more, do you know what? I think it would be. So what I would see more clients, but it wouldn't be one-on-ones. I would love to do, I'd need more than an hour, but I'd do a group where it's more a personalised group, that they get something out of it, but they're really doing the therapy themselves in a way, just guided. Yeah. Guided therapy, I think, that's what the program where I'm about to launch is. I've always had the program, but I've refined it. Process, got to make the process better. So that's going to be in that space, in that sort of 1 hour a week space, more guided. But it's very, that's what I would do. Yeah. Yeah, that's would be, I'd like to do more one-to-many to make it more that many get a more affordable approach. Yep. But they are having a guided therapy session rather than a one-on-one full set, because group work is incredibly powerful. Yeah. That's what I would do with that extra hour.
That's beautiful. The second question, if there's what's like a motto or a quote that you know that you live by? You have to rack your brain maybe a bit for this one.
Yeah, hang on. I have so many things. If my team member was here, she'd be like, oh my God, this is what you say all the time. And I can't even think of it now, but, do you know what? Let's get this shit done. That's it. You would laugh, but if you came to my house, when my son got diagnosed, I was in hospital for the first 30 days with him, right? We went in one day and I never left for 30 days.
Oh, wow.
And then when we did, you had to come, you went home for like a day or whatever, and then we had to go back and start all this treatment. And I remember holding his, so we started at PMH back then, which was like Baghdad compared to PCH. And I remember holding his hand at the front and said, right, buddy, let's get this shit done. And one of those stupid light boxes you get from Kmart? Yeah. We've got it up, and we put it up on the bench, and it has been there ever since. And he's out of treatment now. He's 2 years post-treatment, but we've always had it. So that's the thing. I think all of us, if something happens, we'll go, let's get this shit done, because it's that element of be responsible for where you are and just get that shit done, man.
Yeah, beautiful. Awesome. Thanks, Vee.
Beautiful, thank you.
That was great. Hi, guys. That's the end of the episode. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. But until then, please follow, like, and subscribe across Spotify, YouTube, or Amazon. And also follow the social media accounts on Instagram and TikTok. If you would like to be a guest or a partnership and collaborate with I'm Listening Co., please reach out on the socials or send me an email. But until next time, thanks for listening.